power of understanding loss. Many times what we do is we lost a customer, let's go get a new customer, and we don't look back. And it's the power of looking back at why you lost, what you lost, and what the customer valued did you misunderstand.
You're listening to Getting It Wrong to Get It Right.
Scott, welcome to Getting It Wrong to Get It Right. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Scott, one of the things, it's like the holy grail of business, and it's pricing. And when I came across your profile, I was intrigued with your statements of what you were saying and the conversation then we had when we met before this podcast. You said two things which resonated with me. And one, pricing is art and science. And you were spot on, because most people don't know how to price. Companies don't know when to add their price. And the fear factor is really if we get it wrong, because there's some sort of psychology with us when we financial amounts are put on the table. And that can go from a clothes shop to a banking system for mortgages or Coca-Cola, whoever it may be. And if a company wants to grow their profit, become more profitable, and need to have the structure on their pricing correct, they call Scott Green.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I may be going off already on a subject. You just hit a key point, this kind of anxiety around making decisions like this. And, gosh, we're in this right now. At the time of this podcast, there's all these tariffs running around and people are trying to figure out what to do. They're anxious about it. We're talking daily to companies about how to react, but it is not necessarily the science side of this. It's not the numbers, it's the anxiety and the other part of this, which is the psychology of what to do, when to do, how to do it, that's on people's minds. But it's an anxious time in this space. We're kind of these odd, almost like in the back room kind of geeky pricing people that people pull out occasionally when it's really important and there's a time.
Wiggle you in.
Exactly. So now is our time in the sun, good, bad, or indifferent. This is the time that this is an important subject.
It's an important subject, and we're talking about tariffs, which is being bounced around the world at the moment. One of the things that I'm picking up from it is we're all in it together. And it's not just one place, it's global. So everyone has tariffs. When I was looking at this, I don't think people realize that Europe put tariffs on stuff that come in from America. It's not just one way. I think some people think, we're putting tariffs. But hang on, there's been tariffs put in. They've always been there. They're just different percentages on it. So these aren't new things that are coming up. And who it really affects is the cost of living. That's who and what it affects.
Exactly. This is it's an artificial thing. It isn't natural that we need these. It's something that politically, policy-wise, whatever we have decided that this is the best course. We can have a long debate, political debate on whether they're right or wrong, or I'm sitting in the U.S., the leadership here and their thinking on it is kind of hard to pinpoint.
Is it a game of poker?
I think to some extent it is. As I think about that, it's a game of poker, but then I'm also thinking I'm in the shoes of some of the people maybe listening to this and kind of saying, hey, I'm in a particular part of business. These threats may or may not be affecting me right now, but how do I respond to this? There's all this rhetoric. And I'd say right now, psychologically, that's a lot of what this is about. And you need to make sure you're clear on if tariffs are coming, that it really is impacting your costs, and that here, I'm going to talk on the other side of the coin. Like if I'm negotiating with somebody that's raising my prices, I want to make sure it ties to something that's really coming through the pipeline and really clear, that tariff is 1-to-1 with this price increase. And when that tariff backs down, will it go away? Because a lot of times what you see is that prices go up and they have a hard time releasing some of that cost back into the supply chain. So to your point, suddenly your costs go up and you've got to pass it along. You have no choice. I mean, if you think you have a choice, you don't. It's just about how long you'll hold it. But consumers ultimately are the ones that are paying for it. It's not who's selling, it's who's buying that's going to be the challenge.
It's the buyer. If you look at a government initiative was to drop the VAT in Ireland in the food industry, restaurants, from I think it was most things here are 23%.
Yeah.
And they dropped it to, I think it was 8%, but they were going to rise it. Now, when they probably dropped that from the higher percentage, was that passed on to the consumer? And if it goes up, so there's always the difference between the chicken and the egg. We do this, but who's really getting it? And I mentioned, I don't know, on the tariff, I think it's a game of poker because there's been tariffs on both sides. And maybe it could be, okay, well, let's just reach to a point of where it's a fixed tariff equally bound on both sides. That could be it. But then who gets it? From one of the petrol, BP and other organizations, which I know that you're well used to speaking to or on that subject line, Ukraine war kicked in and our petrol went from, the American audience listen to this now will be very shocked. It went from 79 cents a litre, not a gallon, a litre.
That's the key point.
And it went up to now €1.79 a litre. And BP in England mentioned they had the best bumper 6 months because they made billions. The market drove it up, consumer suffered, and the petrol oil company profited. So that's from a global perspective. But there's subsections of pricing within organizations that need to have the right price just to keep the business function for growth and profit. That's the space that I want to try and sit in today, because of a lot of our listeners are, business owners between the age of 35, 55, turning over a couple of million a year, and we're going, okay, how do I price? So I said in the very beginning of this, price is a science and an art. And you said that. What do you mean by that?
So, I'll step back from the art of it and talk about the science of it first, because I think functionally that's the kind of key area that we need to focus on. So I think of price as a function of revenue and profitability, right? Cost is an element and it drives sometimes our profitability, which sometimes then drives a strategy to price. But I really think of customers, what they have in their pocket, what they're willing to pay, the value that I deliver to that, and how I set my strategies to do that. So that I know a business owner that's sitting here that's 2-3 million in turnover. Okay, that's all theoretical. Yeah, what does that kind of mean to me? There are, for your services and for your products, let's just say we're talking to a manufacturing business that has not a service, but a standard product. Your input costs shift. You have to do something different about that. I think you can't just sit and wait to see, because it bears your P&L, it bears your business. And if you think this is about goodwill to your customers, you're chewing into your own salary, you're chewing into the ability of to make payroll and to pay everybody. So you can't just sit and wait for everybody else to figure out what they're going to do. You have to have and constantly be looking at this. If you don't think this is important to you in terms of your price strategy, just, take the cost on these tariffs and sit back and wait and see what happens. It's not going to be pretty for you. So you have to be thinking forward. And so the question in this situation that we're in with a tariff, with a pushing cost potentially coming, is don't get emotional with the rhetoric. Be talking to your suppliers or to your input costs and understand when and if they're going to be seeing these costs come. Now, I think others know this that are in the businesses that they're in. So I don't mean to be telling people how they ought to be, giving them new knowledge, but your suppliers have hedges, they have contracts, they bought product costs from a while ago. The steel costs may be changing now, but what their input costs may not be hitting right now. So if they're raising their costs on you, you got to make sure you're challenging them to say, look, is this legit? This load of product that came in cost you this much more. I got to make sure I understand that. And the question is why? Well, one, I need to understand why within my business, what it's hitting and it's legit. The other is to pass that information along to your customers. And I think customers are understanding, they're hearing this. And if you can explain things to them in simple and easy ways as to why this increase is, I'm not being greedy. I'm not, kind of to your point, but you weren't saying it, but you're kind of insinuating it. Our big companies just taking the profit, taking the mick out of us, and we're getting this short in the stick. There has to be a legit conversation about what that cost means, and that hey, I can't I'm an employer. I've got a bunch of employees here. I have to react to that. I've got to take care of them as well as take care of you as a customer. There's services, there's all these things I do. So here's what my price increases are, and here's what our options are to work together to try to solve this.
Yeah.
I think many times prices are put up and nobody explains anything, and it's raw frustration because you're a consumer or a buyer and you're just seeing all these costs come, and if you can't explain it, it becomes like, well, everybody's being greedy. If we can kind of explain the chain, then we're better. And I think the other thing to do is to think of this like some of the best practice around this tariff could be a surcharge. Surcharges are not my real price all the time. They're just a cost on top of my price that's based on these activities that I have no control over. And so I can explain it that way. I can also then pull surcharges back. So if tariffs pull back, if I start to see lower my costs, I just pull the tariff, I pull the surcharge back. I'm back to my normal prices. I'm not gouging anybody. So that doesn't always work perfectly in every industry, I grant you, and not all will have the same approach. But I really encourage this better communication and clarity so that your consumers understand. But also then I think when you negotiate, there's choices. So there's choices between, do we keep going this way, Mr. and Mrs. Cummer? Do we shift to a different approach? I can do these things. We can back these services off. I can do some things to help you if cost is an issue for you. But everybody's got to kind of pass this information along, and it's got to be clear to everybody as to why. I think then you can kind of have the right kind of conversations, and it may not be what everybody wants to hear, but it is the fair point.
I think what you're saying, and it's something that we use when we're in this teaching organizations about selling. It's communication. And unfortunately, someone has to absorb it. And if an organization wants to take a hit on it, that's affecting multiple things within their internal, to all the stakeholders, actually, on it. But it's about saying, look, example, we be speaking to a company who may have not put their prices up in 5 years.
Yeah.
And they want to just put them up. And we say, well, if you put those prices up, you're going to scare the hell out of everybody, that have been using your facilities over the last, 10, 12 years. What you need to do is you need to give a reason of why. And one of the best ways is to say, look, we were trying to keep our prices as low as possible. And even when inflation was pulling up for the last 5 years, we kept our prices and took the hit. But it's come to a point now that we can't absorb them, and we'd like to pass some of these on to you. A perfect example of that, Netflix. There was a time at Netflix, they had a price.
Yeah.
And everybody in the neighborhood could sign into the one account for $6.99. I think we had all my kids were probably giving them to their friends. Like, I remember jumping on once onto Netflix and I went, who the hell is that in Greece using their Netflix, And they sort of they used a tactic, they curbed it back to it was only 5. And then for the same price, they curbed it back, it was only 3. And if you wanted more, you had to spend X amount. And that's one strategy in pricing.
I think that you're making a key point here in terms of structure and approach to pricing. So, I mean, again, we talk in terms of price list or my established kind of value for my product and service, and then my net price or my realized price. What you're describing there, I would suggest to people is if you feel, look, the tariffs are going to hit, but maybe I want to, for a period of time, absorb that a bit as you described. Sometimes the threshold's just too big. You got to do what you just described. Sometimes you might say, I don't know, I'm going to be a little careful here. The next thing to do is to reduce the amount of discount. So in essence, what Netflix was doing was saying, if my guardrail is this big, I'm cutting that guardrail down, and I'm reducing the amount of, it's not a discount, but I'm reducing the amount of flexibility I'm giving for a net value, which is, hey, if 15 people could use this Netflix pack, I've reduced it now, and therefore, if you want access, I'm asking for more value back, and so I want some of you to step up and pay for a service. Think of this discounting as the same way. Maybe you were giving them a 20% discount in the past, or a 15% discount based on their volume. Hey, I can keep the price point the same, but I got to reduce the discount. I can't give you as much. I'm going to take discount away. I'm going to take the other option is services and other values. I think in terms of profitability, not only price. So I might look at my payment terms. I might look at some of my, ecoterm type things that are in my, before I've been more flexible when things were good and prices were better and value was there. I might start to look at some of those, we sometimes call them our commercial policies, our payment terms, our early pay discounts and things like that. I might reduce some of those. I might be more stringent on a policy I had before, but I didn't really exercise. Those are ways to kind of start to create more pools of profitability without kind of pushing prices up. But again, I think you got to take the longer term and understand the short term. So price strategy at the price point, what you say this product or service is worth before I start discounting everything. Before you raise that, you really got to make sure that this is something that's going to sustain, and that you, when you set that new value, that you understand the impacts.
But you mentioned it there, it's the value you offer.
That's right.
And it's loyalty, customer brand loyalty as well. So if you go into an organization and we can say for everybody to keep the lifestyle that they have, you need to be earning 20% more year on year.
Yeah.
Okay. So you go into an organization and they're kind of going, okay, look, we're in a volatile market. We're looking at to see about our margins that we have. Mm. You come in and look at a 360 and going, okay, it's not about just pricing. It's what you can cut. And that could be as simple as wastage within the organization that they're not even aware of. Would I be correct in saying that?
Oh, Joe, look, it is really, I see again, if you think of price, as I said before, price, the profit pool I'm creating based on revenue and price combination, it's that profit pool that my function or what I focus on is about. And price, the value of a product and making sure it's right and connected to the market is kind of the most critical thing you can start to do. But hey, let's take away from tariffs. Let's think on a really good year. Let's take your best year from the last 2 or 3 years. If you had a good year or a decent period of time that your business was humming along without many external factors, this is stuff that I would have come in and said, you're leaving a lot of money on the table and you need to tighten these things up just to run the business more efficiently, to extract value so that you can invest in growth. You can add salespeople. You can bring in and create new products. You can innovate. You can expand your territories. What I try to coach people on, what the profitability improvement is not greed. It's investment in the business, the growth in the business, building for the future. This is a time. So if we kind of step out of it's good times, I would have coached you to do that. Now, I think it's imperative that you're tightening up and that you're making sure anything to do with the customer, what you're offering and what your service and your value and how you manage your interactions with invoices and payments and all that needs to be tightened in a way so that it's right. You're sticking to policies, you're changing policies, and that's how you ought to be running your business anyway. And we try to explain that to people. Now just the time you should tighten those up anyway, right? This is the time that it makes sense to people that, okay, I'm going to raise my prices. I'm going to use a surcharge. I'm not going to overdo it, but we're also going to make sure that some of these things that we haven't been enforcing as much are going to be what we're going to be doing going forward. This allows us to be more efficient, more profitable, and we can kind of, if you will, take some of the cost and not pass it all on. If you're kind of, hey, we all get there. I got a small business too. I'm a consultant, helping people around the globe, but I'm out trying to drive a business too. I've got to make sure I'm efficient and effective in what I do, and I'm delivering value to customer all the time. And I've got to constantly be looking at my profitability and my efficiencies. And we all get kind of in this revenue growth mode, and we're just looking at it as revenue. And my function's role and what I'm trying to do is, that's great. Let's look at what you're giving away to get. Are you giving away a lot of discounts? Or you're diluting your profitability? Is that the smart thing for you over the long haul? Those are the kind of things that we got to you can see that we're kind of like P&L experts, but in a way that it's value to customer, pricing out, back in.
Okay. Well, I have 2 questions for you. One is, what's the biggest waste that you do see in all the years that you've been in business? What's the biggest waste?
I'd say...
I got to say, can I, I say office supplies is one of the biggest wastes.
Okay, I see where you're going. Look, I don't look at office supplies.
I know, but I'm just laughing. I'm just looking around here. What in the organizations you deal with, what is the biggest waste that you see?
Here's a kind of a key tip point. I had about 2 or 3 things, and this is going to be one of them anyway, so I'll give it now. I think you got to look in a small business, you don't have somebody looking at pricing on this, but get your CFO and say, let's look at all of our customers. Let's understand the revenue by customer, how much we sell them, and let's look at our discounts or services and offers, and let's lay them side by side and look at them and understand how much we're maybe giving to some people that don't deserve that discount as much as others because they're not doing as much revenue. Now, sometimes that happens because there's a high potential customer. So I'm giving them the discount hoping that comes, but think I can prove to you year in and year out, business by business over my 25 years, that tends to be something that doesn't materialize a fair amount of the time. So I think the best way to go do this is making sure your discounts that you're giving are fair. And this could be a kind of a fair factor to, my other good customers that are giving me similar, or that are giving me much more business, should they be getting the same price? And I'd say no, right? And services or offers, like it's more to do with the full package.
Yeah, it's cutting, the 10% of companies you're dealing with. That bottom line 10% that you're dealing with is getting rid of them, because even though they're purchasing, they could be costing you more money than actually the deal.
So you're getting to a point where if you had the time and effort to actually do a P&L by customer, and that's a big exercise, and I would not recommend overspending too much time on this, but that's where you get to ultimately. You're kind of saying, which are my more profitable customers, growth, revenue, profitability, and is my price strategy fair to everybody? And I think what you'd say out of this is that there are different segments of customers. No matter how big your client base is, you have segments of customers if you don't realize it. And you need to kind of put customers in segments, understand what motivates them. Your high value customers, the ones that are most loyal to you, there's the customers that'll switch suppliers based on price or whatever. They'll switch often. Do they deserve the same package or value? And
yeah, I can relate to that 100%, because if you look from a prospecting point of view in the sales to get the people in, we'll go with an organization and we'll get them to tier their clients, their B clients and their C prospects. So we'd actually have different strategies and how much effort, time, because you don't put the same amount of effort, time you put into a C tier than you do into an A tier as well.
And I think the segmentation also helps you, especially on prospecting. And this is part of our same thinking. We're aligned 100% on this, which is after I look at all that profitability, I understand why people are less profitable. I start to see some patterns in the segments of my customers. These are the loyal ones. These are the ones these A customers are all my best services, all that. I give them a lot, but I also get a lot back. But sometimes you overserve those customers because they're your best customers. You give them a lot more than you should. So what can I do to improve profitability within that segment? I have a segment of customers that are my B customers. They buy some of my good products. They may not value all my services. They don't buy everything from me, but they're good customers. Then there's the C customers that'll switch in a heartbeat, let's say. And you've got to look when you're talking to a new prospect, there's probably a series of questions around what they value, what's important to them. And when they answer that, you got to listen to them. You got to make sure that the salesman in you wants to sell them something and say, let's get going. I'll fix this as we go, or it'll get better. But listen to what they're saying to you and put them in the right bucket so that you treat them the way that makes sense. A lot of times as salespeople, and I've been and I've had a sales team, you just the big revenue number, I need a new customer, this is great, I'm so excited, but then you find out later, you give them more than they should, and you find out later that they'll switch in a heartbeat, or
the brand loyalty is gone.
But it's important to match your offers up to your customers, and we find the leakage, we call it margin leakage. You said, where's the waste? The margin leakage happens when you don't think of it that way structurally.
You mentioned there that you three points, and that was one point that you wanted to get across. What are the other two?
Yeah, again, I'm going to separate from the tariff and conversation and the emotion of today. So we got to separate a little bit from that to really think about what we typically would do. The power of understanding loss.
Explain that to us.
Yeah. So many times what we do is we lost a customer, let's go get a new customer, and we don't look back. And it's the power of looking back at why you lost, what you lost, and what the customer valued. Did you misunderstand what they valued? Did you put them into our segment conversation? Did you put them in the wrong segment? So when I get to segment, my 3 points were going to be, first, let's look at why we lose. and take our time on that, because this is the really important piece. Understanding why you lose customers and why things go awry is very important, because it helps us with our strategy going forward. It makes us understand the customer better, makes us change our offers, and it doesn't necessarily change your price strategy, but might shape your business differently.
Yeah, there might be one thing that you blind spotted you in the business and they've said, I don't like, and you go, okay, well, let's change that. Yeah.
Yeah, is that something I change in my business? That's okay, that's something to react to, or is that something like, hey, you aren't going to be a good customer for me anyway? I would say that those that switch from a price or a value, or switch because they had one interaction with your salesman and didn't like it, that are emotional, you're good. Those are, you can't keep, you're going to still get those kind of customers, but you're going to have to think of that as just a replace. I just got to replace them. These more value customers, the B and the A's, I got to understand when a B or an A, when an A leaves me, that's a big important rethink about what we're doing and why, and how I can improve that. So I think this idea of understanding why you lose, and by the way, it doesn't matter the size of your company. The biggest companies in the globe, I can tell you, set strategies and don't look back. They just kind of keep going forward. And in our part of the world, we kind of say, look, winning and losing, which ones, which customers, and why, and then start to understand, kind of how everything connects. So this is
the great strategies. The great strategies are made and put on a Google Doc and never seen again.
Yeah, you just think replace. I got to replace that revenue, and I just got to push forward. And I think taking some time and really analyzing the whys. Go ask the customers. That's the important piece.
We did the one thing that we did years ago was that we ran a campaign and we wrote out the campaign, and there wasn't as much feedback. So we then went and asked all the existing clients about what you like about A, B, C. Yeah. And the words and what they told us was fields apart from what we were doing. So we grabbed all their language and we dumped that and ran the campaign again. It changed the dynamics, because people were reading it and going, oh, they're speaking my language, and the power of that. And if people are losing clients, the beauty is, why did you leave us? What was the one thing? Because we need to know so we can be better.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's just exactly the methodology at its most simple.
Keep it simple, yeah. But Scott, companies are frightened to do that because they're not willing to hear the truth. So there's the very art part of this, the very part of you don't want to hear it. And I think the more that you're open to hearing it, it really changes. And in big companies, this isn't a size issue. Same issue. People don't like criticism. You can have all the biggest brands in the world. Yeah. There's still people who, our organizations aren't completely run by AI yet. Yes. But people have feelings and emotions, and we all have issues, something going on. Yeah. And I find the bigger you go into the bigger organizations, there is some sort of fear, imposter syndrome that may be going on. So the last thing they want to hear is criticism from someone because they fear, oh my God, I could get fired. Where they should be taking the criticism, acknowledging it so they do better.
I think it's important to understand your customer and understand what makes them tick and why. There's times where some of what this feedback is not things you can control. Some changes in the business, the customer's business, etc. But you're creating this dialogue to understand customers. Why does that help? It may be a concern about what I might hear, but I want to understand what they say and what they value, so I know when I'm looking at another potential customer and I'm communicating to them, to your point before, what do I say to them in terms of what I can offer, what my value is that will click? So I need to target more people like this. What was it about them, and what was it that they valued, is back to that segmentation piece, kind of understanding my different customers and why. That's the heart of pricing, if you really understand it, is that understanding that consumer value, the customer value, and then connecting it to what I offer them, and that it's fair and they react positively to it. There's a lot of technology or a lot of analytical models that are sophisticated that help you get better at that when you're at the right scale and it makes sense. But if you just spend time there, the value is significant. My third piece, back to just kind of completing the three. So the first was, assess your losses, understand why. The second was then that connects to segmenting my customers. So that was really the pattern I was trying to create. And the third was focus on profitability. Profitability as a percentage and profitability as a dollar pool. And again, I kind of answered that in a different way with the tariff conversation, but what am I really after? It's not revenue growth at lower profitability. I can run my business into the ground by growing. So if I focus on the profitability of my business, my customers, I'm tightening up, like we said before, where there's leakage or loose policies or things I'm not enforcing that are, by the way, standard in the industry, but you're just not enforcing them. Other people do it. It's not like you're doing something drastic and unique, but I tighten up, I try to make sure I'm extracting giving the most value to the customer at the best profitability. Always the question is why? That's not a greed issue. That's a growth of my business issue, opportunity. And I can take those pools of dollars, give them to my shareholders, but also take a portion of that and invest in growing my business, which means employing more people, getting to more customers. I create more value that way. If I don't focus on profitability as one of my 1, 2, 3, I can bury my business in trying to grow too fast. I can bury my business in working capital it requires to just run the thing day to day. I lose the plot. But if I can gain my profitability, then that's my engine. No matter what else is happening, I can keep that kind of thing core. That's why it's important to pass the price along when it's important. That's why it's very critical. And if you kind of don't do that and your costs are coming up, you're squeezing yourself, that's a spiral potentially. And that's why you've got to then, as long as you can justify it and explain it to customer and you have means of managing that effectively, that's all you're asking for is that fairness factor.
There's
eating this is not a good strategy. You need to pass price along.
You need to pack it on. Yes. Companies that are, as you're telling me these, there's companies that are flicking through my mind. You have insurance companies.
Yeah.
Which we had a company over here that turned into an insurance company, and he said it was like printing money. Really, they were on the level to become a bank, and a recession hit. Then you have the communications, or cell phones, the industry, and then the utilities and everything as well. They're on the bigger scale, but there's the organizations that have 200 to 300 employees, 10, 15 million plus a year. They're the organizations that really need to keep the pulse, keep their eye on the ball. They're the ones that a 1% could have vast experience in one way or the other for them as well.
That's right. And that, to your point, I think if you focus on this space of price and profitability, the typical yield is typical, again, 2 to 500 basis points or 2 to 5% of profitability. So when you have a $10, $20 million business, that's a sizable number. And the bigger you grow, the better. But you can find that year in and year out because you don't fix things one time and then the competitors and everybody just stay the same. Things are in constant motion.
If life was that simple.
So you kind of just keep a focus and a discipline, and this can yield that kind of return, which gives your business a lot. Create more flexibility for yourself. You give yourself some room to kind of operate when things get tougher. You don't have to overreact. I think it's important that everybody have this, kind of discipline in their world.
And it is about, it's awareness, it's discipline, and then it's actually implementing. We'll come to the end, and Alison has fired me over a couple of questions that we'd like to ask you. It's more of, the relaxed. But if you could swap your shoes for someone, who would it be for one day?
One day. This sounds crazy, but I'd like to be in the room that some of these tariff conversations are happening if I was going to swap, but just for the day. Not that I could change it so I could understand it and so I could help coach people and get some logic to it, because it doesn't make a lot of sense right now. So that's, I guess, an easy button, swapping shoes for a day. Over a longer haul, there's the Warren Buffetts and the big moguls that have the right attitude and right approach and understand value. And I think I would probably spend time with Warren, not swap shoes, just to understand how he thinks.
Just, even sit down with him for a day. Yeah. And which then, if you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be? Looking back at your youth.
Yeah. So, this is even recent advice. So, I was in the corporate world for quite a while, 25 years doing pricing.
Yeah.
I started my own company, so many of your listeners know some of these lessons better than I do. But the understanding what you're getting yourself into, understanding, making sure you have a realistic and a realism towards what it's going to really take, and that there are going to be some challenges as you're trying to do something new and different, create something that wasn't there before. My younger self, I'd say still go do that, but I'd like to remind you that you need to make sure you're thinking about some things that I didn't spend
Yeah.
enough time thinking about when I got into it. I thought, well, I could just get into this, find customers and grow this thing quickly. And, I didn't think about what it would take to keep payroll rolling while customers paid you at different times and you're waiting on an invoice. I mean, these are things your listeners live and breathe. I didn't have to worry
The
about that in my past life. And that's
the
important
uncertainty,
part.
the life
So
of uncertainty. Yeah.
the pain of some of that and the sleeplessness of keeping the lights on at times was a bit of an interesting.
Why did you then decide to move from corporate into your own
Well,
brand?
I've always, probably at the heart of it is that I have experienced people coming in to give advice and help companies. And so there's some big names that if you've been around a bit, you've heard a McKinsey or some other big consulting firm, and I've experienced that. And I think organizations need somebody that's actually been on the other side and lived and breathed some of this at different levels and different kinds of organizations and different parts of the globe. And I felt like I had something to share and give. Second thing is I've been doing this 25 years. It really frustrates me that the level of discipline processes and tools that companies have isn't better than it was 25 years ago. We're still repeating the same mistakes in companies. We're still seeing some of the things we talked about before. Somebody will do something, but then 2, 3 years later, people have left and that falls back and we get back into our old habits. Keeping a strong, profitable business can create so much value for employees, for shareholders, for everybody. And I see I have a passion for doing that. That passion and the growth it requires is that's back to what I had to learn. But I'm on the other side of that. I'm doing very well now, very happy with what we are doing and our growth
Okay,
path.
well then, what would you like to be remembered for?
Helping your listeners and other companies in any way I can to be more profitable. I think profit is, there's I don't know if you've seen the old Wall Street movie and you remember one of the things they said was the guy said greed is good.
Yeah,
I don't think greed is good, but
no,
I think being profitable is not is
a
a very
greedy
important,
thing.
it's a very valuable thing to a lot of people, not just the owners, not just the leaders, but if you manage that the right way. So I'm passionate about creating profitability because I think it's a good thing. No matter where your business is, what you're trying to do, let's make it more profitable. That's a real passion for me.
Last question.
Yeah.
Can you share a pivotal moment where you learned a powerful lesson by getting it wrong to get it right?
Yeah. There's a couple here, and I'll just do them brief, both of them. I think in the space I'm in is where I'll kind of focus. So working with companies to improve this profitability, getting data accurate, spending your time trying to get the reports and the data perfect before we make decisions is the hamster wheel. Just meaning you could be spending a lot of time trying to get it perfect. And we all have those people in our organizations. We love them, but they can also stop us from making good decisions. So getting 80% accurate data and figuring out what you can do with it and taking actions to improve your profitability is more important than spending your time on a perfect report or perfect data. That data is king now. And if you're not spending time in it and trying to drive for more data and understand your competitors and understand the marketplace and the dynamics, you got to keep going down that path. But perfection's not what we're after. So that'd be the first one. The second one was when we wanted to solve. First time I got into this space, I was with BP. I was in the UK, and we were resetting the way that our refining marketing business functioned. We were putting new ERP in SAP, and we were putting new processes and new tools. And the excitement around being able to reset the table and put tools in was the kind of focus. And I say tools, investing in tool to fix a problem that you have is not where you ought to be spending your money. You ought to be spending your money and focusing your time, not necessarily spending money, is looking at your processes, looking at the basic approach you're taking, and can I make it through now? Can I do some things now that start to show that if I had better data or if I had a better system, this could make me even more money more consistently. So if I can go and kind of do some proof of concept, some trial runs on fixing something, what would that look like? Can I prove that? And then that can justify, now I can go buy a system because I know why I'm buying it versus I'm going to spend all this money on a system, and I expect the system and the process of putting the system in to fix a bunch of process and a bunch of way people think and do. That's where the failure kind of happens. So don't do systems first, and don't worry about data being perfect. Use the data you have and make better decisions. Those create profit. Those improve your business, and they can justify, and you know better what to fix, what you really need. A lot of times we think, hey, if I just buy that pricing system, or if I just buy that reporting system, it'll fix everything.
No, it's the piece of advice I give new companies: spend wisely. And it is about systems, processes, behavior, and measurement. That's
you got
it as well. Scott, your web address there, if people want to reach out to you or find more about pricing.
Yeah, it sure is www.profitdrivers.com.
Scott Green, thanks for coming on. Get it wrong to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Getting it wrong to get it right.